Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Today we're going to be going through our webinar, Security Awareness 21 Years Later, Is Awareness Training Dead? Firstly, we'll just have a look at today's itinerary, what's coming up. Firstly, we're going to be covering the history of security training, looking back at the last 21 years of security awareness. Then we're going to be debunking some common myths and misconceptions around awareness training. Following that, we're going to be learning about human risk management, or HRM, and whether it signals an end to traditional awareness training. I'll give you a sneak peek, I don't think it does. Next, we're going to be looking at human judgment and its role in the evolving modern threat environment. And finally, we're going to be sharing 5 tips for keeping your security awareness training campaigns effective and relevant. So, without further ado, I will hand you over to my wonderful partner, Patrick, to get us cracking with the evolution of security awareness training. Patrick.
Thank you very much, Alex. So yes, as you just said, we'll now be talking briefly about the history of security awareness training and how things have changed in the last couple of decades. So let us travel back in time, all the way back to the 1990s. So I don't have to tell you, the world was different then. The first RSA conference, created so that professionals could discuss growing cybersecurity threats, was held in 1991, but consisted of just one panel discussion. Technical protection levels, such as encryption, was so much less prevalent that they were almost non-existent. Websites that used the HTTPS scheme to securely encrypt web traffic was only introduced in 1994 and was used by a minimal number of websites. In 1999, the Melissa virus sent a shiver down the spine of the computer industry. The virus spread quickly via infected email attachments that, when opened, sent the virus to people in unsuspecting victims' address books. So hundreds of corporations and government agencies were affected worldwide, as an estimated 100,000 computer accounts were infected. So cybersecurity wasn't a term that was widely used at this time. This was many average office workers' introduction to the world of computer viruses. Michael A. Vettis, the director of the National Infrastructure Protection Center, said at the time that this type of problem could cause tens of billions of dollars in losses. So as the new century dawned, the general population were aware for the first time of the potential dangers posed by cybercriminals. And organizations were rightly concerned that they would become the victims of the next Melissa virus, or worse. So the very first National Cybersecurity Awareness Month in 2004 was an indication that an increasing number of people were recognizing the importance of security awareness training. Unfortunately, the security awareness training campaigns of the mid-2000s were very different to what we would expect today. 2 decades ago, training often took the form of infrequent but extensive in-person seminars. Knowledge retention off the back of these protracted, irregular sessions was, unfortunately, typically poor. So progress was made throughout the 2010s, I'm pleased to say. A gradual shift began towards short, focused training on individual topics. But this training was often infrequent, which allowed knowledge to dissipate over time, a point that Alex is going to come back to later on. In 2016, about a quarter of web traffic was encrypted. And in 2017, the San Francisco RSA had a record number of more than 43,000 attendees. Now, more people than ever were aware of the threats posed by cybercriminals. Landmark legislation GDPR in 2018 did even more to underline the importance of information security, and organizations were more determined than ever not to fall victim to cybercrime. In our modern world, 98% of web traffic is encrypted. So there's been significant progress in technical protections since the 1990s, but there are still plenty of gaps for criminals to exploit, and it's unlikely we will ever reach perfection. Cybercriminals and organizations alike quickly realize that human weaknesses are a far greater vulnerability than gaps in firewalls or antivirus software. Either people are the direct cause of the risk, such as sending an email with confidential information to the wrong email address, or they are the targets of attacks by cybercriminals, such as phishing or spear phishing. The exact percentage of breaches that are caused by human mistakes varies depending on your source, but all agree that it is an extremely high percentage, 84% according to one source that I found. And this is even after over 20 years of security awareness training. So this has led some to question whether traditional cybersecurity awareness training has much value at all. For example, in 2023, Microsoft's Digital Defense Report stated that their study of a video-based phishing training showed that it was ineffective. They found that in the tens of millions of users whose data they analyzed, this particular form of training reduced clicking behavior by a mere 3%. And some have pointed to results such as these as evidence that security awareness training is ineffective, that employers think of awareness training as a box to be ticked, and users can be left with a lack of motivation or a true understanding of the risks and how to prevent them. And this in turn has led to a few myths bringing up regarding security awareness, which, Alex, if you'd be good enough to talk us through that now.
Amazing segue, yes. So, let's get cracking. Myth number 1, security awareness training does not work. Well, assessing how well security training works is admittedly a tricky topic for some people. It's challenging to quantify. For example, how many security breaches or incidents did you avoid last year? It's not an easy question to answer. So, when discussing the effectiveness of training, it's essential to focus on the correct and available metrics. So rather than attempting to quantify avoided incidents, professionals such as yourselves should focus on measurable changes in employee behavior and awareness levels. So key performance indicators might include a reduction in phishing email click-through rates, increased reporting of suspicious activities, or simply higher completion rates of training modules. Regular assessments of simulated attacks, these can also provide tangible data on how effectively employees apply their training in real-world scenarios. Of course, the effectiveness of security awareness training can vary depending on how it's delivered, just like anything, though a recent study in 2023 found that even a relatively basic training program can reduce phishing susceptibility by as much as 50%. Worth noting, there is evidence to suggest that the benefits of training will fade over time the longer the employees go without training. This is a pitfall that can be mitigated, and a point that we'll be discussing further later. But myth number 2, that there is a single solution to your security woes. Now, I'm sure we all would like to think that there's some sort of perfect solution out there for every problem we have. You know, eat this snack, you'll be healthy and live forever, and everyone will love and respect you. It's not that simple with snacks, and it's not that simple with security. There isn't such a thing as a one-size-fits-all solution. So, I hear you asking, what does work? Well, the contemporary research suggests that using multiple delivery channels and formats to convey the same security message has a greater impact than a single generic message. So, presenting security messages through a mix of formats, such as text-based, video, interactive scenarios, and game-based training will help capture and affect the behavioral change that you're looking for. So while some employees may find that detailed guides are their best way of absorbing information, in all likelihood, others, probably the majority, will find that simulations or gamified content will affect more change. So the key takeaway on this myth is that awareness training should never be a set it and forget it solution. It should be adaptable, dynamic, and ultimately resonant with different types of learners. Myth number 3, humans are the weakest link. Now, this term gets bandied around in cybersecurity discussions quite often, and while no one is trying to argue that humans don't contribute to security incidents, this kind of thinking can overlook some of the human strengths and potentially downplay some of the technology, the vulnerabilities introduced by technology. So, to expand this, systems rely on digital input and often, not always, but usually predefined logic that can struggle with novelty. Humans, however, can recognize through what we call intuition or gut feeling these kinds of novel anomalies, which is crucial for spotting social engineering attacks in particular. These are anomalies that systems will miss. So instead of viewing humans as the weakest link, it's probably more accurate and helpful to recognize that both humans and technological systems play unique roles in maintaining a strong security posture. So, quick example, you just got to think about how often basic phishing emails pass through even the most advanced spam filter. To expand this a little bit further, we have a case study as well that I like to think of. So in 2020, SolarWinds, if people aren't familiar, is a company that specializes in IT management software. In 2020, there was a pretty significant cyber attack in which the company's Orion software, a security product, was compromised, most likely by state-sponsored actors, in which malicious code was injected into a software update, essentially allowing these malicious actors access to thousands of organization systems, unfortunately including government bodies and Fortune 500 companies. So, despite the attack's sophistication, it was in fact human intuition that led to its discovery. FireEye, a leading cybersecurity company, was one of those targeted in this attack. It was only when employees noticed some unusual activities, anomalies that their automated systems had actually missed. And following their instincts, they conducted a deeper investigation, which eventually uncovered this horrendous malicious code. The FireEye CEO, Kevin Mandia, described this as finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. This case, I think, underscores the critical role that human expertise and intuition plays in detecting complex threats that automated systems might overlook. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much. Another seamless transition. So in response to these points, a new approach to information security has been devised recently, which intends to put the very concepts of human strength at its foundations. So human risk management, or HRM, asks organizations to view users as their greatest assets to be utilized in their fight against cybercrime. So at this point, I suppose we have to confess that contrary to what our webinar's title might suggest, human risk management is not out to replace security awareness training. HRM is a broad approach to cyber awareness, which includes security awareness training. There are many aspects of human risk management that we at HUT6 subscribe to ourselves, such as customizing campaigns and continuous development. But for the next few minutes, we're going to focus on one major aspect of human risk management. And this is the guiding principle that security training and controls should be distributed proportionately and not wasted on educating users who are deemed to be less important than others. Managers assign a risk score to each employee based on their individual risk factors, and these can be determined based on actions they undertake, frequency of being attacked, or simply the role they fulfill within the organization. And this allows security teams to quickly identify the riskiest employees and focus their efforts on those who are most likely to engage in risky behaviors. Proponents of this theory argue that this will be more effective in reducing risky behavior than a generic traditional program schedule, because you are targeting the people who pose the most risk. In summary, compared to a traditional security awareness campaign, which seeks to educate all users of all potential security threats, HRM attempts to inform some users of the specific risks that they are likely to encounter to a high degree, while educating other employees to a far lesser extent. So we thought that at this point we'd ask you all what you think. So what is your opinion of HRM based on what we've told you so far? Do you think that it is the future of cybersecurity training? And what I'll do, I'll pop a link to an anonymous poll in the Teams chat. You can just go ahead and click on there and indicate your response, and then we'll bring it back and hopefully see what people think about that. Sorry very much for the cheesy music in the meantime. We'll just give it about half a minute, give people a chance to give their responses. Okay, so some are coming in. Thank you very much indeed for joining in. Okay. Interesting. Very good.
I'm just enjoying the music.
Yeah, I know it's a bit cheesy. Thanks very much. Okay, we'll just give it 5 more seconds or so for anyone that wants to offer a rating. But actually, I think that based on my maths is correct, we've got nearly everyone there. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. So yeah, based on your responses that you've just given, a lot of people are saying that it sounds very good, human risk management. So around about 4 out of 5 is the majority of what we've got. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear your thoughts, and basically, in our opinion, it is a good thing that people are trying to innovate and modernize their approach to security awareness training. So it seems like we'll be pretty much aligned. I mean, if you read up on what human risk management is, if you care to do that in detail, it does align pretty closely with what we at HUT6 believe. But there are some potential pitfalls to the risk factor aspects of HRM, which I now wanted to discuss. So risk assessment features heavily in human risk management, and the problem is that due to a phenomenon called cognitive bias, we can be very bad at judging risks. How individuals make estimations is influenced by factors such as past experiences, cultural background, and personal values. Here is an example of how our unconscious bias can affect our decision-making. Psychologists Tversky and Kahneman found in their experiments in 1974 that our estimates are heavily influenced by their context. They asked participants to estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Before giving their answer, each participant had to spin a wheel of fortune, generating a random number. And the subjects were then free to decide on the number that they wanted to submit as their answer. The result of the Wheel of Fortune was random and totally meaningless. But despite this, participants' estimate of African UN member countries was typically fairly close to whatever random Wheel of Fortune amounts they started on, regardless of what that amount was. As Kahneman himself remarked, the spin of a Wheel of Fortune cannot possibly yield any useful information about anything, and the participants should have simply ignored it. But they did not ignore it. Okay, so another behavior pattern, the so-called gambler's fallacy, has been studied by multiple psychologists. And this is a false belief when subjects are attempting to anticipate the next outcome. Studies show that we tend to believe that something will happen just because it hasn't happened yet. So a popular experiment is to observe a subject spinning a coin, and when placing a bet, if previous outcomes have landed on heads, then players often assume the next outcome will be tails. However, as we all know, no matter how many times you play, your chances are always 50-50. So, just returning to security management, these two experiments show that reducing users to statistics and assigning priorities based on risks may seem efficient and effective. But experiments such as these show that we humans love to oversimplify and are pretty terrible at gauging risks. Quantifying human risk can be challenging as it involves both tangible and intangible factors, and traditional metrics may not fully capture the complexities of human behavior in security contexts. So, in other words, if we rely too heavily on data-based risk assignments, there is a risk that we may miss nuances in daily life that can be easily exploited by cyber criminals. So, if you are using a model such as human risk management, which makes a conscious decision to exclude some users from training based on risk assessments, you just have to be very, very careful not to fall into one of the traps posed by cognitive bias. And at the risk of sounding like I'm trying to put you off, this isn't the only disadvantage to HRM. With risk assessments, behavioral analysis, tailored training, continuous monitoring, and adaptive policies being just some of the major elements of the program, it is questionable whether it is practical or sustainable in the long term. So, is human risk management just a fad? Well, once again, let's not go too far. I think we've established, and it bears repeating, that human risk management is not an alternative to security awareness training, so you don't have to choose between the two. It encompasses security awareness training. We at Hut6 believe that everyone has the right to the knowledge and skills they need to combat cybercrime in our modern world, regardless of their position in the organization. Human risk management done correctly should build upon the solid foundations of a decent, effective security awareness training campaign. So, by all means, innovate, modernize your training. Just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So with that in mind, Alex is going to now talk you through some tips to help you to make your security awareness campaigns as effective as it can be.
Thank you, Patrick. So, as Cybersecurity Awareness Month enters its 21st year, I'd say it's pretty evident that while the importance of cybersecurity remains pretty constant, the nature of threats does continue to evolve. Security training programs must adapt to keep up with modern security challenges like advanced social engineering techniques, AI-based attacks, all the complexities of remote work, all of which have seen pretty significant changes over the last few years. As such, we want to share with you five top tips for keeping your security awareness campaign relevant and effective. So, tip the first, tailoring your campaign. To get the best results from a security campaign, you'll need to ensure that your training is customized to your business. For the best results, the science suggests using a variety of formats. Use what people like and what is effective for your team. If one form of training isn't yielding the results that you want, try something else. Ensure that your training is applicable to your organization so that users are prepared for the real-world threats that they will encounter. If you don't have any printers or fax machines in your office, it's probably worth deprioritizing those topics in your training. Similarly, if everyone works in the office, remote work training isn't likely to help you in any way. And let's face it, users don't want to sit through training when they don't feel as though it's relevant or helpful. They'll switch off, and who can blame them? Number 2, micro-learning. We touched upon this earlier when we spoke about the positive effects of training wearing off So you are in charge of the frequency of your training. You can distribute the training or tutorials at the rate that you think is best for your staff. In general, we recommend spacing your training so that your users are absorbing little but often, delivering training in digestible modules with concise and specific learning objectives, making it easier for users to digest and ultimately retain that information. Shameless plug, as it happens, we are curating training with these best practices in mind. Upcoming, we have some new bite-sized quizzes, and also what we're really pretty excited about, what we're calling cyber hazards. So this is a training tool that's quite reminiscent of the kind of hazard perception tests you may have done when you were learning to drive. I'm sure fond memories for all. Tip number 3, measuring success. Now, every organisation will have specific objectives and goals in mind when conducting training. As discussed, awareness is the means, and ultimately behavioural change is the desired goal. So keep records of how many incidents you have before training and during and after. So you can measure the effects that training is having. You could be looking at phishing email reports, malware downloads, or even devices lost. Make sure you keep a track of all these areas that you want to see improvements in, because if you cannot measure it, then it's unlikely that you'll be able to improve it. Tip number 4, influencing behaviour. We've covered, actually, this topic in a fair amount of detail in a previous webinar, if anyone is interested. But there is another technique that I'd like to cover, and that is nudge theory. So nudge theory posits that our behaviour can be significantly influenced by small or sometimes even unnoticed little behavioural interventions or nudges, and these can take many forms. Here we have a couple of visual examples. On the left, a public staircase where the steps have been designed to look like the keys of a piano and where sounds are played as people step on them. Encouraging people to perhaps not take the escalator, get a little bit more exercise, and perhaps be a little healthier. On the right, the cash machine that only provides the cash after you've taken your card back. Doesn't stop you from walking off without your cash, unfortunately, but as we've said, no solution is indeed perfect. But nudges can be utilised in cybersecurity as well, integrating them into the design of your systems or protocols. So, for instance, you could have a "Are you sure?" prompt before a colleague approves a new payment, or having a pop-up warning when someone clicks on a potentially unsafe link. Ultimately, we recommend being creative, consider how your workflows and protocols work, and integrate it in unique ways. Incidentally, I very much recommend the book Nudge if you are interested in learning a little bit more about little behavioural interventions. It's a great read. But tip number 5, create a secure culture. Those of you who have taken our course before will understand the importance of cultivating a secure culture within your organisation. The most effective way to defend against cyber criminals is to foster an environment where cybersecurity is a shared responsibility and where security measures are not just implemented but valued by users. So wherever you can, encourage practices that make security a regular, active part of daily operations and not just a box-ticking exercise. Find ways to recognise and celebrate employees who excel in this area, and if you can, empower them to contribute even more. Now, many of you here today are individuals to whom others within your organisation will look to for guidance and expertise. So, if there's one thing that we can really confidently recommend to you today, it's for you to all lead by example in your words and actions, and for you to all be advocates for continuous improvement. And we're absolutely sure that you're up to the task. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we've had a pretty productive discussion of the last 21 years of security awareness, of human risk management, and what you can do to keep your training relevant and fresh. We'll be sticking around here for a few more minutes, but I will add, if there are any more topics that you'd like to hear from us about, do shout out now in the chat, or indeed send us a follow-up email. There's my email address just on screen here, ajames@hut6.io. Feel free to message about anything. For those as well who don't know, as well as the wonderful cyber hazards we have upcoming, we also have a new series of content coming out in a couple of months' time. And finally, another shameless plug, if you do have any peers or ex-colleagues in the industry who you know might be looking out for a security awareness provider and haven't heard of Hut6, please do them the favour of letting them know about Hut6. I'm sure they would appreciate your wisdom. But ultimately, thank you ever so much for joining us. Have a fantastic day. As I said, we'll be sticking around to answer some questions, but thank you. Cheers.